Welcome to Gritability, a podcast about the power of perseverance and overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds. I'm your host, Adam Clausen, and I'm someone who served 20 years, 5 months, and 17 days of a 213-year sentence, learning all about myself and what it takes to develop gritability, which to me is a skill. So gritability is about having the willingness to do those things that others are not willing to do in order to attain the life that you want, the life that you dreamed of. I'm living proof of what's possible. If you haven't seen my story, check out John Orlando, Action Junkies. Had a full background on my story there, which led to this podcast. Me talking about those things that allowed me to become the person that I needed to be in order to win my second chance at life, to lead the amazing life that I'm leading now. And I'm someone who has developed gritability, and I know what it means to get knocked down and to not just get back up, but to keep pressing forward. You know, there's a Mike Tyson quote that I love. Mike Tyson, said something along the lines of, man, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And that is so true, right? Because if you're going after the life of your dreams, really, pushing in every aspect of your life, you're going to meet adversity. You're going to get punched in the face. Like, no doubt, that's coming. So the question is, when you do get punched, how do you respond? Right? Some people, they take that hit and they stay down. They're out for the count. That's it. There's no getting back up. Other people, they're a little bit more resilient, right? They can take that punch in the face, they get back up, but they hesitate, right? They hesitate, they either don't move forward or they go back to their corner. They're up, but they're not really ready to get back in the fight. That third small percentage of the population, when they get hit in the face, right, they pop back up and they start pressing forward. They're right back in the fight. They're never out of it. That's, to me, that's what gritability is all about. It's living in that manner that, every time you get punched in the face, you don't just get back up, but you keep pressing forward. So I've been able to develop gritability. It's not something that I always had. It's a skill that I learned over time. And I learned it, by watching others who had developed it in their lives and by learning from their examples. So I would say for most people, right, all of us look at certain situations in our lives or in other people's lives. And until it happens to us, we can only say how we would like to respond to a certain situation, right? When we see somebody on the news who runs into a burning house, to save a family, to pull people out of there, repeatedly puts themselves in harm's way, does some heroic act. I think each one of us wants to say, like, if I was in that situation, that's how I would respond. I'd be the one to run in that building. There are other people who, quite honestly, say, I wouldn't take that risk. But most of us have that desire to respond in that type of manner. But the reality is, until we're placed in that situation, we never really know how we're going to respond. So for me, I guess really understanding the potential that I had to develop that level of gritability came when I was sentenced to 213 years, and I left the courtroom, and I went back in the holding cell. I sat in that holding cell with two of my co-defendants who had also just been convicted, and it was a somber moment, to say the least. We sat back there, basically looking at the floor. I can still vividly recall the cold concrete under my feet, the feel of the cold steel bars in my hand as I'm holding on to the bars looking out, and I started to laugh. I started to laugh, and the other people in that cell thought I was absolutely crazy. They're like, oh boy, he's losing it. He just got 213 years. He just got a life sentence and he's laughing. And what I realized in that moment was my ability to determine how I was going to respond to that situation. It was in that moment that I thought back to my previous time in prison, because this wasn't the first time. It wasn't the first set of mistakes I had made. I had made those in my youth, 18 to 21. I was in a state prison. And while I was in that state prison, serving a 12-year sentence, substantial sentence at that time. And we don't need to get into me making multiple mistakes, going down the same path repeatedly. We'll get to that, believe me. But it was during that time, when I was about 19, 20 years old, that I met an individual who was working in the law library. And he was there on a double homicide. Brutal case. Don't even want to get into the details of that. It was just gory, horrific. And I knew this individual from my youth. He and a whole another group of guys that I was a few years younger. I looked up to these guys. There was a certain level of admiration, respect, and all of them had gone to prison before me. And I end up in prison at this young age, and I'm looking around, and here are all these guys that I looked up to, and I'm like, wow, this is what happened. This is where everyone ended up. And this one individual in particular, who's serving this double life sentence for these two very brutal homicides, he's in the law library. He spends most of his time there, understandably, trying to find some way to get some sort of relief so that he does not have to spend the rest of his very long life, because he's a young man, in prison. And every afternoon, we would be out on the prison yard, and the sliding door would open up, and they would let him out by himself. He would come out onto the yard from that law library, and as soon as he came out, it was like sucking the air right out of the yard. Everyone's like, ah, oh, here he comes. Here comes this guy again. And he had such a negative energy, and it was palpable. You ever know someone like that? Like, they walk in the room, they just suck the air out the room. We're outside on the yard, and this happened. That's how strong the negativity around this individual was. So every afternoon, especially during the summer when it's nice out, it's a beautiful day, same response. Door slides open, guy walks out. Oh. And I said to those other guys that I was around, I said, I don't know how I would respond in that situation. I said, remove the crimes, just the fact that he's serving a life sentence. This is all he's ever going to know. I can say how I would like to respond, that I would not be miserable every single day, that I would, approach it with a different attitude, that I would treat people differently, that I personally would just respond differently to the situation. I said, but until I'm in that situation, the best I can do is say, I hope that I wouldn't be like that. But I'm going to cut this guy some slack, because I have no idea what he's going through, what the weight of that must feel like, to know that you're going to spend the rest of your life in this place. So fast forward. I'm in that prison cell, holding on to those cold steel bars, and I start laughing, and everyone's looking at me like, this guy is crazy. He's lost his mind. What I was laughing about was thinking about that guy, thinking about that slider opening up, him walking onto the yard. And I said, now I know what it feels like. I will never, ever be that guy. Regardless of what happens from this point forth, whatever happens to me during this journey that I am now on, I will never have that mindset. I will never have that negative attitude. I will never be the person to suck all the life out of the room. So it was in that moment I made a conscious decision on how I was going to respond. That was the first step, right? That mindset, that attitude. And I talked previously on podcast number 1 about having that winning attitude or that winning experience, being a part of that throughout my youth. I had that. Not everyone has that to use as a reference point. But I knew that I had done some things in athletics like overcome odds, been that underdog, gone on to win, been down 20 points in the fourth quarter with only a couple minutes left, come back to win. When you have that as a reference point, everything becomes possible, at least in your mind. So I knew standing there holding on to those bars that although I had a 213-year sentence, life sentence, federal prison, no chance of parole, no early release, this was it. I knew that I wasn't going to give up. That wasn't me. Like, I'm a fighter. Like, I'm going to take the punches, I'm going to get back up, and I'm going to press forward. That's it. That's who I am. And I made a conscious decision in that moment to start with that mindset and attitude, to make sure that everything I did from that point forward kept that positive focus. So there's a performance that comes from having that mindset, that attitude. And from that day forward, I continued to live in that space. That's not to say that there wasn't, man, I so many times woke up in the morning, was like, oh my God, I'm here. I have a life sentence. Like, oh, how long is this going to last? Because although I believed in myself, in my ability to do whatever it took to get to a place where, one, I felt like I had done enough to make amends for all the mistakes in my past, all the wrongs, all the people that I had harmed. And two, to earn the respect, the support of others who would get on board and say, okay, he's done enough time, he's accomplished enough things, these things of substance, to where we should revisit this. We should give him a second chance. Now, keep in mind, that path didn't even exist at the time. There was no way out. I just had to believe that by doing those things I needed to do, that eventually that door would open up, that an avenue would present itself, and I would be ready to take advantage of it. So after I received this sentence, right, I end up going to a United States penitentiary behind these 40-foot walls, razor wire, all those things that you see on TV. Terrible, terrible places, right? Truly intimidating places. And when I end up in these environments, for me as a young man, I needed to demonstrate a certain level of resilience. I needed to express a level of confidence that maybe I didn't fully feel. And I want to be cautious with this because there's a phrase, fake it till you make it. I hate that term. I'm a big believer in, if you're faking anything, it can never be authentic, right? Like, you can't get an authentic outcome by faking something. So for me, it was figuring out how to act as if I had already done these things, I had already accomplished these things, to where I felt that sense of confidence about myself. So how do you do that in an environment like that, where there's very few outlets or means to, express yourself without getting yourself killed, of course, not to make light of it, but there's consequences. There's consequences to how you present yourself in those situations. So for me, I had to figure out, how do I develop that level of gritability? How do I continuously put myself in a situation where I am constantly challenged, I am constantly uncomfortable, to the point where I know that I am growing, I am evolving, I'm developing the resilience that I need, but I'm getting stronger, I'm getting smarter, I'm doing all of these things. So for me, one of the places where I found that was in the gym. I had to talk about physical goals previously. How do you do that? So I started torturing myself, literally torturing myself physically, in order to develop a level of gritability, to build up my perseverance, my strength. And there were times where you know, the gym became a very comfortable place for me, being uncomfortable. Like I learned how to live in a state of discomfort within an environment that started to become normal, comfortable for me. So I'd be in the gym and I would literally lift until I was ready to pass out, doing super heavy deadlifts or squats to where the room starts to spin, things get shaky, and you put the weight down and you're about to go out. Thankfully, I never went out, but I learned to push myself right up to that edge, to that place where most people won't push themselves. And I realized that that was something that I had complete control over. I could continuously come back to the gym, torture myself every day, come back the next day, do a chest workout where we're doing drop sets all the way down to body weight push ups to where I am literally face down, drooling on the floor, and I can't push myself back up. Now, with that comes a level of vulnerability, right? Like to allow yourself to be pushed or to push yourself to that point to where you appear to be almost in a vulnerable state. People would look at me and be like, man, this guy is crazy. He's willing to push that hard. And he's like, he's completely tapped out at this point. But at the same time, there's a level of admiration that comes along with that. And the reality is that my time in that environment was defined by the way I responded, the way that I challenged myself on a daily basis in that gym. People looked at that and how I pushed and were like, wow, I'm going to give this guy a little bit of space. And although I didn't realize it at the time, that fact that people were willing to give me that space as a result is what allowed me to make the most of that time, to have the space that I needed to really focus on becoming the best version of myself. Now, there was a number of incidents that occurred early on outside of the gym, but very similar to this. And I'll share one of those with you. This is a funny one because believe it or not, there is hockey in prison. Now, I don't want people to take this the wrong way because I hear all the time, oh, guys in prison have it so good. They shouldn't have access to all these things. Believe me, prison is miserable. There's nobody that wants to be there, right? There are a few things where you might find a temporary escape. Like if you're into art or you're into music, you get a chance to play a guitar for a little bit. That's great. Like that's just such a brief moment out of that whole miserable, what seemingly miserable experience. It's a tough experience no matter what. And as I talked about, athletics are a great outlet. So I continued to do those things in prison. But prison sports are very different from real world sports. And so, yes, hockey was one of those things that we had. We were up in the Northeast part of the country. So we got a lot of people from that part of the country that grew up playing hockey. Very, very good. I'd never played hockey, but I'm an athlete. I'm willing to learn. I'll pick it up. And again, I told you I was hyper aggressive. I felt the need to go 100 miles an hour all the time, to be hyper aggressive, to overly assert myself so that people knew that I was serious, didn't challenge me. And in doing so, they did. They gave me that space. So first night that I go down there to play hockey, I'm like, listen, I don't have the skills these guys have, but I know that, effort, nobody is going to outwork me. I am going to go, go, go. Like I am on it. And I was. And, we're maybe halfway into this night. We have it for maybe 90 minutes, 2 hours. We're about halfway into it. It's on a Sunday afternoon, I think. And the ball, remember this is a ball. This is not skates, right? This is floor hockey. And the ball goes back behind the net. And on the back wall of the gym, there are two I-beams that come down and across. right? They go all the way from the ceiling, 2 stories up, all the way down to the floor. And there's pads in the middle. So if you're playing basketball and you run forward and you hit the wall, you're going to hit the pads. Now, no one's going to be running sideways playing basketball, but hockey, we're using the entire gym. So when the ball goes around behind the net and I go full steam running towards this, and there's a guy right on my shoulder that I'm checking off, and I go flying into this wall, I slide along these pads, and that I-beam that's coming down, the I-beam connected straight down the middle of my head. And although you can't see the scar now, it split me wide open. Boop. And of course, I'm not going to hesitate. I just got punched. I'm not staying down. To be honest, I didn't even fall down. Like, it rung my bell literally. Bang. I could hear the metal vibrate throughout my body. I hit it. I backed up. Everybody else stopped. I kept going. And they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Time out. And I'm like, no, I'm good. Let's go. They're like, you're not good. And I reached back and I touched the back of my neck and it was all blood. And I'm like, I'm probably going to need some help. So I go over to the officer. I'm like, hey, I got a little thing here on my head. And he's like, oh my God, that looks terrible. And I'm like, okay, well, what do I do? I'm new to this facility. I have no idea how medical works. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. He tells me, listen, I'll call down there. I'll open the door. You just walk down. I'm like, really? My head's wide open. If it's as bad as you say, like, just send me down to take a walk to medical. So I take off. I walk down there and I get down to medical. And the first thing, the nurse says is, oh my God. I'm like, all right, this isn't making me feel any better. Like, what are we going to do about this? She's like, well, you're going to need some stitches. I'm like, okay. So how do we do that? And she's like, well, I've never done these before, but, we'll figure it out. I'm like, oh my God. Well, at least it's on the top of my head. It'll be hidden with hair. Hopefully I can keep this hair for, some years and we won't see this scar. But she proceeded to stitch me up. Clearly, it was maybe not her first time, but she had not done this too many times. So it was a painful experience. I got stitched up and it didn't take long, thankfully. They gave me a little packet of gauze. I don't even know, like nothing, like, here, take this and go ahead, you're good. And when I get back out, headed out of medical, I said, can I get back up to recreation, like the gym? I got a game to finish. When I walked back in the gym, because they let me go. They let me go back up there. When I got back in the gym, these guys are looking at me like, what are you doing here? I'm like, let's go, man. Let's play. And it was by me showing up, coming back to that gym that day, from that point forward, I know that everyone looked at me a little bit differently. And it wasn't just that, oh, this guy's crazy, he's out of his mind. It's, man, this guy will not stop. Like, he's got a different level of drive, push, like there's something different in him. That's what gritability is. And to me, it's about the action. It's about how you respond. Like, when that level of adversity, and I use the physical example because those are the easiest ones to demonstrate, right? Like, when something else happens of an emotional nature, of, when we lose someone, we lose a loved one, somebody that's close to us, that affects everyone a little bit different. So it's a little bit more challenging to gauge what's going on inside, as opposed to seeing physically the manifestation of something. So it was those physical situations that I used to demonstrate, not only to myself, what it meant to have that gritability, but also to show others that I had that in me. And people started responding accordingly, right? When you live in that space, when you constantly respond to that level of adversity in that same manner, people take notice. They look at you with a different level of maybe admiration, inspiration. They see the confidence that you have, and that translates to every aspect of your life. And it matters. Uh, and I would end with this: other people's perception of us matters. Worst advice I hear people giving all the time is, you don't need to care what other people think of you. That's not your business. That's terrible advice. Terrible, right? Like, we are social creatures, and no matter what you are doing in life, you're going to be interacting with other people. Life is really about relationships, but whatever you're doing, you're going to have to interact with people, and how those people perceive you ultimately determines what your relationships look like, how you go about just life in general. And going back to that energy that I talked about, that individual, when that slider opened up and he'd walk out onto the yard and just steal everyone's energy, right? Like, that's the type of person no one wants to be around. No one responded positively to him. I was willing to give him grace, but I didn't want to be around him. So the difference is, when you have that level of gritability, when you're willing to do those things that others won't, to achieve the life that you really want, that inspires a different level of confidence. People respond to you differently, and their perception of you is literally everything. It's everything. And I've seen this demonstrated time and again since I was released from prison after 20 years, 5 months, 17 days. I walked out, and people didn't see me as someone who just walked out of prison. Like, when I walk into rooms, people see the confidence that I carry with me. It's not until I tell them of the time that I served and of all the mistakes in my past that they do a double take, because to them it doesn't add up. And that means, like, nothing that you've done in your past, none of us has to be defined by our past, but we all have the ability to choose from this point forth how we're going to respond to every situation, every challenge, every adversity. And the more you do that, the more comfortable you become being uncomfortable, living in that space of challenge, man, the more doors that are going to open up for you. It's just, it's the way of the universe. Good things happen to good people. And when you are living in that space, exhibiting that positive energy, you're going to come in contact with other great people. So, gritability, I've kind of set the foundation here, hopefully giving you an understanding of my experience, my definition of what it means to have that gritability. And I would very much, like to focus going forward on finding those other stories, the ones that have inspired me, the ones that I know, those people who have something to add to this conversation, to serve, as inspiration. So keep pushing the power of perseverance, gritability. It's all about overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds. When you get punched in the face, get back up. My name is Adam Clausen. Thank you for tuning into Gritability. We'll see you here on the next show.